I remember that night like a wound that never closed. The glow of my phone screen was the only light left in the room, a cold rectangle of hope against the dark. I waited. God, I waited for her name to flash across it, for that familiar vibration, for anything. Instead, I fell asleep breathing in the faint scent of her perfume on my pillow, warm vanilla and rain, while somewhere, miles away, she gave herself to someone else. You tell yourself love is solid, permanent, like the foundation under your feet. You believe that if you pour enough of yourself into it, it becomes unbreakable. But in a single breath, in one unguarded moment, it can crumble into dust. What began as a simple, loving idea, a spontaneous weekend trip to surprise my wife, spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't have written if I tried. Just one flight, one hotel stay, one wrong door. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, my family, was hanging by a thread. My name is Michael Anderson. I'm 50 years old, husband, father, ordinary man, at least on the surface. I've been married to Rebecca for nearly 20 years. We've built a life together. 2 kids, a home that smells of morning coffee and crayons, a rhythm that used to feel safe. Curtis, our teenage son, growing faster than I can keep up. Sophie, our 10-year-old daughter, still small enough to think her dad can fix anything. She's the one who looks at me like I hung the moon. And maybe that's what made what came next so unbearable. That Wednesday began like all the others when Becca was away on business. I was juggling too much, burnt toast, spilled milk, and a coffee cup glued to my hand. Sophie sat at the table, poking at her cereal like it had done her wrong, while Curtis scrolled through his phone, earbuds in, lost in his own teenage universe. Becca had been gone nearly a week, longer than usual. Boston, she said, a major client. Important meetings. I tried to be understanding, but the silence in the house was heavy. That's when it hit me. One of those impulsive, heart-led ideas that feels right in the moment. What if we went to her instead? What if we showed up at her hotel, me, Curtis, and Sophie, and surprised her? I could already picture her face lighting up, her eyes widening in disbelief. The laughter, the tears, the hugs. The way she'd pull Sophie into her arms and thank me for reminding her what matters. "Hey," I said, setting down my mug. "What would you guys think about surprising Mom this weekend?" Sophie's spoon froze midair. Her eyes widened like I'd just promised her the world. "You mean, like, just show up?" "Exactly," I said with a grin. "We'll fly out Friday. She won't see it coming." Curtis looked up, skeptical at first, then shrugged, the corner of his mouth twitching. That could be kinda cool. Coming from a teenager, that's a full declaration of excitement. Within hours, the plan was set. I cashed in a favor at work, called the school, booked the flights. I couldn't stop picturing Rebecca's face when she saw us walk into that hotel lobby. It felt good, like love in action, like something we needed. That morning, I tried to call her, but it went to voicemail. Not unusual. Her work kept her busy. I left a message anyway. "Missing you. The kids keep asking when you'll be home. Love you." No reply. Later that night, as I packed our suitcases, I called again. Still nothing. A small flicker of worry tried to ignite, but I blew it out. She was probably networking. Maybe at one of those fancy corporate dinners she was always half dreading, half loving. When I tucked Sophie in, she held her stuffed bunny close and whispered, "Do you think Mommy will cry when she sees us?" "Maybe," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Happy tears. But I couldn't have been more wrong. The tears that night would belong to me. The next day came fast. The flight to Boston was short but felt endless. Curtis had his earbuds in, lost in his music. Sophie chattered the whole way, planning what she'd say first when she saw her mom. "She's gonna freak out, Daddy. She's gonna scream." I smiled for her, but inside, something felt off. I called Rebecca again before we boarded. No answer. Texted her once we landed. Nothing. Curtis noticed. "Dad, why do you keep checking your phone?" "Just confirming our car rental," I lied. My gut was tightening, a low pulse of unease I couldn't shake. Becca and I had survived our share of rough patches, but silence wasn't her language, especially not when it came to the kids. When we landed at Logan, I called again. This time it rang. No voicemail right away. I clung to that sound like it meant something, like maybe she just missed me by a second. Boston greeted us with chaos. Crowded airport, wrong car line, Sophie whining for a snack, Curtis rolling his eyes. By the time we finally got on the road, the city lights had swallowed the horizon. It was almost 8 p.m. "I'm starving," Sophie said from the back seat. "Same," Curtis added. "Can we eat before we find Mom?" "Let's see if she wants to come with us," I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. My heart thudded harder with every mile we drove closer to the Marriott. I tried one more call as we neared the hotel. It rang again. No answer. The hotel's automatic doors slid open and for a moment everything felt suspended. The lobby gleamed under soft amber lights. Polished floors reflected the glow of chandeliers. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive perfume, the kind of place where people smiled too easily. Curtis and Sophie looked around, wide-eyed, impressed. "Wait here, guys," I said, nodding toward the lounge area with plush couches. "I'll check us in and find out where Mom's room is." Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Can we surprise her right now?" "That's the plan, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. My heart was pounding, but not from excitement anymore. I walked to the front desk. The receptionist was young, cheerful, too polished to sense my nerves. "Good evening, sir," she said. "How can I assist you?" "Hi," I said, clearing my throat. "I'm checking in and also trying to reach my wife, Rebecca Anderson. She's staying here." Her fingers danced across the keyboard. "Let's see. Yes, Mrs. Anderson is a guest. Would you like me to call her room?" "Yes, please," I said, relief washing through me. Finally, confirmation. She was here. The receptionist dialed. Waited, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, sir." "There's no answer. Could you try again?" I asked, my stomach tightening. She did. Waited longer this time. Hung up slowly. Still no response. "Would you like to leave a message?" "That's all right," I said, sliding my credit card across the counter. "We'll check in. My wife knows we're coming. It's, a surprise." Her polite smile faltered just slightly. "Of course. One moment, Mr. Anderson." The printer hummed, keys clicked, and she handed me 2 key cards. "You'll be in room 732. Mrs. Anderson is staying in 719. For a heartbeat, I just stared at her. "Wait," I said slowly. "So, different floors?" She shook her head. "No, sir. Same floor, same floor." My pulse kicked. Room 718. Close enough to count the footsteps between us. And somewhere in that silence, behind one of those hotel doors, the truth was already waiting, breathing, moving, alive, waiting for me to find it. "Just a few doors apart," that's what the woman at the front desk said, her voice light and professional, but with a faint tremor that didn't belong there. My heart had already started its descent, slow and cold, before she hesitated, just long enough to twist the knife. "According to the system," she said carefully, "Mrs. Anderson checked in, with another guest." For a moment, everything inside me stopped. The low hum of lobby chatter faded. The polished floors beneath me seemed to tilt. "Another guest?" The words stumbled out of my mouth before my brain could even catch them. She blinked, instantly regretting speaking. "It says 2 guests are registered in her room." I just assumed, "I'm sorry, sir. I probably shouldn't have mentioned that." I forced a chuckle, brittle and hollow, the kind you use to mask a crack in the foundation. "No worries," I said. "Probably just a colleague. You know, sharing costs or something." But we both knew that wasn't true. Becca's company didn't make people share rooms. It was practically written in their golden handbook of professionalism. My hands trembled as I signed the check-in sheet. That small digital stylus felt heavier than lead. I gathered our room keys, thanked her with a smile I didn't feel, and turned back toward Curtis and Sophie. My thoughts were a storm. Jagged lightning and black waves colliding in my chest. "Did you see Mom?" Sophie asked, practically bouncing out of her shoes, her bright eyes pulling at something deep inside me. "Not yet, sweetie," I managed, forcing my voice steady. "Let's get to our room first. We'll surprise her after we freshen up, okay?" The elevator ride was a silence wrapped in tension. The soft hum of machinery, the faint elevator music, Sophie humming under her breath. It all blurred together. I caught Curtis studying me in the reflection of the elevator doors, his brow furrowed. He didn't ask, but he didn't need to. The kid always had a radar for bad news. When we stepped into our room, everything was perfect. A clean, generic kind of luxury. Crisp sheets, muted gold accents, air conditioning humming like white noise. The kind of room meant for business travelers, not heartbreak. I set the bags down and inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. "Can we go see Mom now?" Sophie asked, tugging on my sleeve. "Soon," I said softly. "Why don't you two wash up first?" "We'll go down in a bit." She nodded and ran to the bathroom. Curtis followed her, muttering something about checking his messages. That was my chance. I slipped out of the room quietly, the soft click of the door behind me sounding louder than it should have. The hallway stretched long and carpeted, muffling my footsteps. The pattern underfoot, gold swirls on burgundy, seemed to twist and pulse like veins. Room 7 and 18, just a few doors down. My pulse thundered in my ears. When I stopped in front of her door, my hand trembled before I even knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Music, laughter, muffled movement, something inside me turned to ice. I knocked again, harder this time. "Becca?" My voice cracked on her name. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and typed, "I'm standing outside your hotel door. Open up." A moment later, the music stopped. Silence. Then, a man's voice. Low. Close. That was all I needed. The truth, once imagined, was already real. The door opened slowly, just enough for a sliver of light to slice through. Rebecca stood there. Her hair was tousled, her cheeks flushed, a hotel robe tied hastily around her waist, and the expression on her face, shock, then panic, then something colder. Irritation. "Jason," she hissed over her shoulder, stepping out into the hallway, pulling the door nearly shut behind her. "Jason." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My name wasn't Jason. "Surprise," I said finally, my voice dead flat. "The kids and I flew in to visit you." Her eyes widened, darting past me as though she could see through walls. "The kids are here?" "They're in our room," I said. "Just down the hall. They've been talking about this all day." She pressed a hand to her temple, glancing back toward the door. "You should have called first. Mike, this isn't how it should have happened." "I did," I said sharply. "Several times." The anger was starting to cut through the disbelief now. "Who's in there with you, Becca?" She flinched, the guilt visible even under the hallway's soft light. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I said, my voice trembling. "Because it looks like you've got a man in your room." "Tell me I'm wrong." The door creaked open wider behind her. And there he was. Tall, fit, maybe early 40s, buttoning his shirt with unsteady fingers. His hair was still damp from a shower. "Becca, everything all right out here?" he asked, concern in his voice. Concern, like he was the one caught off guard. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The edges blurred. My pulse was the only sound, and you are, I said, calm, too calm, like the calm before something terrible breaks. Rebecca stepped between us. "Mike, don't—" "No," I said, my tone low and even. "I want to hear it from him. Who are you, and why are you in my wife's room?" The man looked between us, eyes darting, confused. I'm Trevor, from the Chicago branch." He awkwardly extended a hand, then dropped it. I didn't know she was married. That sentence. It detonated in my chest. I turned to Becca. "You told him you weren't married?" My voice came out a whisper, but it carried like thunder. She closed her eyes. "Not here. Not in the hallway. Trevor," she said quietly, "you should probably go." "Yeah," I said, my jaw tightening. "Good idea, Trevor." He raised his hand slightly, voice cracking with guilt. "Look, man, I had no clue. She never mentioned a husband. Or kids." He grabbed his jacket, his cologne brushing past me as he walked away down the hall. Just like that, he was gone. And I was left standing there, with the woman I'd built my life around. in the wreckage of something I'd thought was indestructible. 17 years, I said quietly. 17 years, Becca, and this is what you're doing on a business trip? It's not how it seems, she snapped, her tone defensive now, shame buried under anger. You don't get it. Then help me get it, I said, my voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. Explain to me how your kids flew across the country to surprise you and instead found you with someone else. She turned away, crossing her arms, her robe slipping slightly at the shoulder. You should have warned me before coming. That broke something in me, cleanly, completely. You're blaming me, I whispered. For catching you. Keep your voice down, she hissed, glancing toward the hallway. The kids are waiting. The kids, I said, the words scraping out of me. Sophie's been glowing all day thinking she'll see you. What do you want to tell her, Becca? For the first time, I saw it. A flicker of guilt, faint and fragile, breaking through the armor. Let me change, she said softly. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I turned to leave, then stopped. How long? I asked without looking back. She froze. It was a mistake, she said finally. A one-time thing, but Trevor's words echoed like gunfire in my head. I didn't know she was married. That wasn't a mistake. That was premeditated. The hallway felt endless on the walk back, each step heavier than the last. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy wood panels. A man aged 20 years in 20 minutes. When I reached our door, I took one long breath and forced my face into something neutral. The keycard beeped softly. Sophie was the first to look up. Did you see Mom? She asked, jumping off the bed. Curtis lifted his eyes from his phone, reading me like a book. What happened? She'll be here soon, I said, forcing calm into my voice. She wasn't expecting us. Was she excited? Sophie pressed. Did she cry? She was surprised, I said, careful, neutral, sidestepping Curtis's stare. How about dinner? You guys hungry? Curtis didn't buy it. Already ordered burgers, he said flatly. And chocolate cake, Sophie giggled. It's your favorite, Daddy. Before I could answer, a knock broke through the air. Sophie shot to her feet. That's her. Before I could stop her, she swung the door wide open and flew into her mother's arms. Rebecca looked immaculate. Hair brushed, face glowing, outfit crisp. Like the last 10 minutes had never happened. Mommy! Sophie squealed. Hi, baby, Rebecca said, hugging her tightly. I can't believe you're all here. Over Sophie's shoulder, her eyes found mine. Silent. Pleading. Don't ruin this for them. Curtis stayed on the bed, unmoving. Hey, he said, voice flat. Rebecca crossed the room, kissed his head. Hey, kiddo. Did you grow while I was gone? It's been a week, Mom, he said, his tone sharp as glass. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Sophie filled it with chatter, describing our flight, our plans, her excitement. Rebecca nodded, smiled, performed, but her eyes kept flicking to mine, and mine never looked back. I could still taste the salt of the Boston air that night, the way it mixed with the metallic hum of the harbor and the dull ache in my throat. My daughter's laughter was the only thing still holding me together. I remember her tiny voice echoing against the dark water as she pointed at a yacht glowing with white light. Her wonder, so pure, it almost hurt to look at. Curtis walked beside me in silence, tall, composed, too calm for his age. He already knew. I could see it in the stillness of his jaw, the quiet calculation in his eyes. The truth had already found its way into him long before I spoke it aloud. We walked the waterfront until the night air grew colder, until Sophie's voice softened and her steps began to drag. She was still chattering about seeing Mommy tomorrow, her excitement bubbling like nothing in the world had gone wrong. I envied her innocence, how easy it was to believe in love before you saw what betrayal really looked like. When we finally got back to the hotel, the city felt like it was holding its breath. The lobby was quieter now, lights dimmed, that strange, sterile hotel scent hanging in the air. The one that never quite feels like home. Sophie fell asleep against my shoulder in the elevator, her head resting against my chest, her little breaths syncing with the pounding of my heart. Curtis stood beside me, hands in his pockets, his reflection staring back from the mirrored wall. I could feel his eyes flick to me every few seconds, reading me the way his mother used to when we were young, before she started looking past me. I pressed the button for our floor, the faint click echoing in the silence. When the doors slid open, everything inside me froze. Rebecca stood there in the hallway, arms crossed, one heel tapping against the carpet like a metronome of guilt. Her posture screamed irritation, but her face changed the second she saw us. The annoyance flickered into something rehearsed, a strained mask of concern. "Oh," she said softly, "I was just coming to check on you." Her tone was calm, too calm. I shifted Sophie in my arms and gave her a look that said everything I couldn't say in front of the kids. "She fell asleep," I murmured. "We just got back." Rebecca's eyes darted to Curtis, then back to me, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might break, say something real, anything. But she didn't. She only smiled, that same polite, distant smile she'd been wearing for months. "Let's get her to bed," I said flatly. The words felt heavy, hollow. Curtis stepped ahead and slid the keycard into the door. The light blinked green. I carried Sophie inside, laying her gently on the bed. She stirred but didn't wake, clutching her bunny to her chest. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my throat tightening. Curtis lingered by the door, arms folded, silent and watchful. Rebecca followed me in, her perfume hitting first. Too strong, like she'd just reapplied it. A cocktail of guilt and expensive deceit. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Instead, I focused on tucking Sophie in, pulling the blanket up to her chin like I'd done since she was little. When I finally turned, Rebecca was standing near the bathroom mirror, pretending to check her reflection. The silence stretched like wire between us. "You're late," I said quietly. She glanced at her watch. "The dinner ran over. Clients, don't," I cut in. "Not tonight." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders drawn tight, her eyes avoiding mine. "Mike," she started, her voice trembling now, "please don't do this in front of the kids." "Do what?" I asked, my tone sharpening. "Ask where you've been? Who you've been with? Or just stand here pretending we're still the same family we were last week?" Curtis shifted near the door, his jaw clenching. I caught his reflection in the mirror. My son, caught between truth and loyalty, between the mother he loved and the father he didn't want to see fall apart. I forced myself to lower my voice. "Go take a shower, buddy," I said softly. "I'll join you in a bit," he hesitated. "You sure?" "Yeah," I managed. "We're fine." He lingered for a second longer, then disappeared into the adjoining room, closing the door behind him. The sound of running water followed a few seconds later. Rebecca and I were alone now. The air between us felt electric, heavy, the kind of silence that hums right before a storm hits. She took a step toward me. "Mike, please, save it," I said. My voice was calm, but underneath it was something colder. "You had your chance to talk earlier, remember? Right before your meeting." Her breath hitched. "It wasn't what you think." I let out a low, humorless laugh. "Then what was it? You just accidentally found yourself in another man's arms? You just tripped into betrayal." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't trust them. "Not anymore." "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A horrible one. But I swear it's over." I stepped closer, close enough to see her mascara smudged under her eyes, the faint trace of lipstick she hadn't worn for me in months. "You said that before," I murmured. "You said you'd fix it. But you didn't even have the decency to answer my calls today." "I couldn't," she said. "I didn't know what to say." "You could have said anything," I snapped, my control slipping. "Instead, you left me sitting in that hotel lobby with our kids, waiting for you like a fool." Her lip quivered. "I didn't ask you to come." That was the moment something inside me cracked. "No," I said slowly, voice breaking. "You didn't. Because you knew exactly what I'd find if I did." She looked at me then. Really looked, and the silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I turned away, forcing my breathing steady. The city lights outside our window painted the room in a pale blue glow. It felt like standing inside a ghost. Behind me, I heard her whisper, "Please don't tell them." I didn't answer. I just stared out over Boston, the skyline blurred through the glass. Somewhere down there, in that same city, was the man she'd risked everything for. And maybe, just maybe, he was sitting in a bar right now, bragging about the woman he'd stolen. The thought ignited something dark in me. Not rage, not even grief. Something quieter, sharper. The kind of emotion that doesn't scream. It waits. I turned back to her slowly, meeting her reflection in the mirror. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice calm again. "Tomorrow we'll deal with this." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Mike, please, what are you planning to do?" I smiled faintly. "You'll see." And as I stood there in that hotel room, watching the woman I once loved tremble under the weight of her own choices, one thing became clear. The story wasn't ending tonight. It was only beginning. The airport was quieter than I expected that morning. Rebecca stood near the gate, arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing against a storm that had already passed through her. The kids didn't say much. Sophie clung to her stuffed bunny, her eyes glassy but confused, too young to grasp the full meaning of goodbye. Curtis, though, he understood everything. He didn't need words. When his mother bent to hug him, he barely moved, offering a quick, stiff side embrace before walking straight onto the plane without a glance back. I followed after him, the weight of that moment pressing against my chest like a bruise that would never quite heal. From the window seat, I watched the city shrink beneath us, Boston fading into a blur of lights and steel and memory. Rebecca's silhouette lingered in my mind, small and distant on the terminal floor, her figure dissolving behind glass. The hum of the engines filled the silence between me and the kids. I stared at the clouds outside, trying to stitch together a version of my life that didn't feel like it had been ripped in half. As we began our descent, my mind wandered to the road ahead. The conversations I'd have to face. What I'd say to Sophie when she asked again why Mommy wasn't home yet. What I'd tell my parents when they noticed Rebecca's car missing from the driveway. What kind of father I needed to become now that the illusion had shattered. "Dad," Curtis said quietly. His voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned. His expression was steady, but his eyes carried a depth that no 15-year-old should ever have to bear. "Yeah, Bud? Are you okay?" It was such a simple question. So human, so undeservedly kind. My throat tightened. "I will be," I said after a pause. "We all will." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word like he was committing them to memory. "What's going to happen next?" he asked. "Is Mom coming back?" I exhaled, watching the clouds slip by beneath us. "She'll come home," I said softly. "But things won't go back to how they were. Your mom and I have some big decisions to make." He was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "You mean, you might get divorced?" I looked at him, this kid who was no longer just a boy. "Maybe," I admitted. "I don't know yet. But I do know this. You and Sophie are everything to me. That doesn't change. Not ever." He stared at the seat in front of him, jaw tight, processing it all. Then he said something that hit harder than I could have imagined. "Just so you know, I think you're doing the right thing. We deserve better than lies." The words hung between us like an echo in a church. Mature, measured, and far too heavy for someone his age. He shouldn't have had to say them. But in that moment, I saw something unshakable in him. The quiet strength of someone who'd already learned how fragile love could be. When the wheels finally touched down, the jolt shook Sophie awake. She blinked up at me, her eyes hazy with sleep. "Daddy," she mumbled, "when do we get to see Mommy again?" That single question, innocent as sunlight, went straight through me. "Soon," I whispered, brushing her hair from her face. "But it might be a little while, okay?" She nodded, half asleep, trusting me completely. I wished I could have trusted the world the same way. The next 3 weeks blurred together. Long days, quiet dinners, half-empty rooms. Rebecca had moved into a small rental downtown. Her clothes were gone from the closet, her perfume no longer haunted the hallway. Curtis stayed mostly in his room, headphones on, his silence louder than any argument. Sophie started to understand in pieces. Small things like why Mom didn't tuck her in anymore, or why Daddy didn't wear his wedding ring. That afternoon, I sat across from Rebecca at the kitchen table. the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays. Christmas mornings, Sophie's first lost tooth. Now it was covered in divorce papers, ink, and the weight of everything that used to be. Rebecca stared at the documents, pen trembling in her hand. "I never imagined it would come to this," she said quietly. "Neither did I replied. My voice didn't shake anymore. Maybe I'd run out of things to break. She looked up at me, eyes soft, desperate. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" I studied her face, the same one that used to feel like home, now just another familiar stranger. I thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe one day," I said, "for the kids' sake. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. Some things, they just leave marks that don't fade." She nodded slowly, tears glinting but not falling. Then she signed her name. The sound of pen on paper was the quietest kind of ending I'd ever heard. When she left, the house felt impossibly still. The ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ghosts of laughter that still lived in the walls. I sat there a long time, staring at the empty doorway, feeling something shift inside me. Not peace exactly, but release. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees by the window. Curtis's voice drifted faintly from upstairs, Sophie's laughter following. Life, stubborn as ever, kept moving forward. For the first time in weeks, I stood up, walked to the window, and let myself breathe. The hurt was still there, heavy and sharp, but beneath it was something else. Hope, small, fragile, but alive. We weren't the same family anymore, but we were still a family, and somehow that was enough to start again. The first morning without Rebecca felt unnervingly still. The house, once filled with her hurried footsteps and the faint scent of her perfume, now breathed differently, slower, heavier, like it was learning to exist without her. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee cooling between my palms, watching sunlight creep across the countertop, catching dust motes that danced like ghosts of the past. Every sound was amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the slow tick of the clock, the quiet clatter of Curtis rummaging through a cereal box. It was strange how silence could feel both peaceful and suffocating at once. Sophie wandered in, still half asleep, her hair a tangled halo. She leaned against me without a word, and I felt her small heartbeat against my side. That simple warmth, uncomplicated, trusting, broke something open in me. All the rage, all the betrayal that had burned so violently in my chest for weeks began to cool into something heavier but steadier. A kind of resolve. Not the vengeful kind anymore, but the kind that decides to build, even on broken ground. Curtis sat across the table chewing slowly, eyes darting to me and then away. "So what happens now, Dad?" he asked quietly. His voice had changed. It carried the edge of someone who had seen too much too soon. I took a slow breath. "Now," I said. "Now we start living again. Different, but real this time." He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. Maybe he did. Kids have a way of seeing through the fog adults wrap themselves in. The three of us ate in a fragile peace, the kind that doesn't come from fixing everything, but from surviving what couldn't be fixed. Weeks turned into months. Papers were signed, routines rebuilt. I traded the sound of arguments for the quiet rhythm of morning drives to school, late-night homework at the dining table, laughter echoing down the hall again. Every so often, Rebecca called for the kids. Her voice, filtered through the speaker, carried that mix of regret and restraint. I answered politely, but the part of me that used to ache when she said my name had finally gone still. There were nights I'd sit on the porch after everyone was asleep, the cicadas humming like static in the dark, and I'd think about how close I'd come to losing myself in the fire she started. I remembered the confrontation, her lies unraveling, the way my hands shook when I realized the person I trusted most had turned into a stranger. But time, slow, relentless time, had a way of dulling the edges. Not erasing, but softening. I'd stopped wanting her to pay, stopped replaying every scene in my head like a movie I couldn't escape. Instead, I'd begun to see something else forming in the ashes, a new version of me. One evening, Curtis came out and sat beside me, his eyes on the horizon. "You ever miss her?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked out over the yard where Sophie's laughter drifted from the swing set, the setting sun washing everything in gold. Sometimes, I admitted, but not the way I used to. I miss who I thought she was. He nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. You're stronger now, I smiled faintly. We all are. A breeze passed through the trees, carrying with it the smell of rain from somewhere far off. For the first time in a long while, that scent didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me of renewal. The kind of rain that cleans, not destroys. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it just means freeing yourself from the weight of what they did. The porch light flickered on, casting long, gentle shadows across the grass. Sophie ran up the steps and hugged me goodnight, her arms wrapping around my waist, her voice muffled against my shirt. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Bug, I whispered, holding her just a moment longer than usual. When the door closed behind her, I sat there a while longer, staring at the quiet neighborhood lights in the distance. The war was over. The scars would stay, but they no longer owned me. In their place, something unexpected had taken root. A fragile peace, maybe even a little gratitude. We weren't the same family anymore, but we were still standing. And sometimes, survival itself is the most perfect revenge of all.